I have now completed the required 3 placements associated with my BEdG course, Bachelor of Education Graduate Entry. This digital story highlights my inclusive education practices and examples of how I have addressed 7 standards for graduate teachers. These are the overarching standards, each addressed through theory, research, or classroom practice. During my final placement, I taught Year 9 Geography, and specifically the topic of food security. During these 30 days of professional experience, I was able to demonstrate a myriad of substandards from the graduate teacher curriculum. I met with my mentor 2 weeks before starting placement to discuss the geography content, lesson sequencing, teaching strategies, and resource materials available. I then proceeded to read through the student textbook and select, organise, and plan a sequence of lessons. This image below provides a snapshot of my planning document that I used. The planning document was prepared based on the Australian Curriculum Achievement Standards, which outlines the expectations assigned to the Year 9 class level. I had the standards and relevant criteria in mind when structuring lessons and assessing student performance. Formative and summative assessments were embedded into my planning. Formative included formal and informal class discussions and participation and completion of worksheets and homework questions. I discussed the summative piece with my mentor and then developed my own task sheet and assessment criteria based on the curriculum standards. I provided students with marking criteria information so they knew what they would be graded on and what their expectations were. During this unit of work, I incorporated a range of teaching strategies and resources. This included PowerPoint presentations, worksheets with missing words, individual and group brainstorm activities, YouTube clips, and reflective activities so the class could recall information from previous lessons. In today's classroom, students are exposed to a range of technologies, so the use of YouTube clips and iPad activities are very well received. However, it is essential ICT is used safely. Before referring students to YouTube videos or websites, I first reviewed them to ensure content was safe and applicable to their learning. To break up lesson structure, I incorporated 2 interactive or role-play lessons in my planning. For the visual learners in particular, this helped embed the theory components and increase their participation. The apple activity allowed students to visualise the proportion of the Earth's resources available in relation to growing food. While the hunger banquet, the class was randomly allocated into 3 groups and served different food items, from Tim Tams to just sultanas, to represent changes in food security across the world. These 2 activities in particular were well received by the students, as highlighted in their feedback they provided to me at the end of my placement. I provided draft feedback to students on their summative piece, the fact sheet. I endeavoured to give feedback in the form of a positive comment, followed by constructive suggestions and improvements, and then another positive comment. And here are 2 examples of that. On marking the fact sheet tasks, I set up a table with the relevant achievement standards, and this allowed me to use a consistent approach to compare their work with amongst the class and the Year 9 expectations. On my final placement, I was able to attend parent-teacher interviews, which worked out perfectly. I was able to sit with and observe both mentors and how they interacted with parents and students. And as I was teaching at the time, I was also able to provide feedback on the current student learning and the tasks we were doing in class. I was particularly excited when one parent commented she too was learning about food security and that her son had been talking about the class activities at home. During my 3 placements, I also spent a lot of time in the science lab, including most recently working with the Year 10 science class. A key component was designing and running experiments, so safety and safe behaviour were of particular importance. Managing student behaviour is something that is required in every lesson, and can be just as simple as reminding students not to talk when the teacher is talking. On several occasions, simply moving a disruptive student to another seat in the room was enough to settle the whole class. as shown here. I completed a number of science experiments while on placements. To ensure safety was addressed by the students, I designed the worksheet with blank spaces left for safety. As a class, we read through the method and then they told me what the safety considerations were based on what we'd just read. Mentor comments reinforced this strategy. Able to connect with their class and communicate with each student. I used a range of techniques, including verbal explanations, diagrams on the board, and video resources. I believe I was able to demonstrate good communication amongst the class, and this was observed by my mentor. I found it beneficial to spend the first few minutes of each lesson recapping material from previous work. Literacy and numeracy are embedded into all subject areas and year levels, not just English and maths. An example of where I integrated a numeracy activity is shown here. We had been discussing how certain factors influence reaction rate. By plotting data points on a graph, students were able to visualize the theory that we had been discussing in class. In my science class, I had 2 Aboriginal students who were polite and well-mannered, but rarely contributed to class discussions. When doing worksheets, I made the point of talking to them individually to gauge their level of understanding and provide them with additional explanations if required to ensure that they were able to complete the work just as the rest of the class. Another student I had been classed as having ADHD, but the parents refused to medicate as believed he wasn't himself when under medication. This meant he was always particularly active during the class time. I found he was engaged best with hands-on activities, so I regularly got him to help me with class demonstrations, which seemed to keep him actively engaged and concentrating on the task. With class worksheets, I often included bonus questions at the end to accommodate for the variation in the class ability. This allowed the students with learning difficulties the confidence to finish their tasks, while still challenging the advanced students to keep them engaged until the end of the lesson. The following standards have been addressed through literature research I have completed during this unit of study. I have reviewed a number of textbooks and journal articles that were available through the Charles Darwin Library, and have listed those that I found most useful. Through this research, I've been able to broaden my knowledge and understanding in these areas to complement my classroom observations and practices. In addition, in my Year 9 science class, I had an exchange student from Finland. Her English was quite fluent, but she struggled with the use of Australian slang. As such, I had to be mindful of the terminology used during my teaching and made sure I accommodate for all student backgrounds. 6.1 is demonstrated through my preparation of this digital video. I now better understand the graduate standards and can see which sub-standards I would like to gain further knowledge in. Even as teachers, we are continually learning. I'm aware of many professional learning resources, including subject-specific conferences that are run annually and provide great insight to teachers. I regularly sought feedback and advice from my mentors and other staff while on placement. I was able to use this advice to better improve my teaching strategies and classroom practices. Additionally, the 3 placements have allowed me to build up a network of contacts that I can tap into in the future. As said, it is vital teachers continue to seek further learning to ensure we are keeping up to date. In return, this ensures students are being taught the most relevant content to aid them in their future careers. As a pre-service teacher, I've always acted in a professional manner, treating my position within the classroom with great respect. In terms of administrative tasks, I've done home group and class roll calls, checked diary notes, and relayed information between school, parents, and students. On my final placement, I attended 2 athletics carnivals, which gave me insight into the running of such events. I've also designed a class excursion which exposed me to the necessary paperwork, risk assessment and permission form. I completed community service with the Smith family, which opened my eyes to the number of students either struggling with education or coming from families who don't value education. I was given the opportunity to design after-school activities focusing on literacy and numeracy, which will aid me in the future for my own lesson planning.